how do you combat evil? With truth, with love, with beauty. You have to start to embody that. When people are very down and out and they decide to make a move forward, in some ways they're facing the whole panoply of problems that confront them in the guise of that single problem, right? It's all lurking behind it, right? It's like they see the tip of a reptile's tail outside a gigantic closet, let's say, and they look and they think, well, that's just the tip of a tail. What harm can it do me? But it's connected to the whole damn beast. And the advantage to that is that if you make that first step forward, you're actually advancing in the face of all that opposition. The disadvantage is that the first task seems so small that you literally have to be on your knees to be humble enough to lower yourself to take that first step. God, is that all I can do? I'm so useless. Jointly explore what might be the right vision for you, and then we can break that down into a strategy, but you have to be on board with the strategy. You have to feel that this is right for you. It's absolutely 100% crucial that it's voluntary. And then we'll say, okay, well, maybe this is a solution. Why don't you go implement it? Come back next week after having attempted this. Let's see how it went. And sometimes people come back and say, well, that went great and it started me and I did 3 other things and you know what, we seem to be on the right track. And sometimes they come back and say, nope, that didn't work at all. And so then you have to think what you do in that situation is make the task smaller. If you make the task small enough, I've never seen anyone not be able to progress if they made the task small enough. But, that can be pretty humiliating. Now, the upside is that once you take that first step, you look the beast in the face and you'll start progressing, not linearly, but exponentially in speed. So what's cool is that it doesn't really matter how small that first step is, because it'll start doubling, and anything that doubles grows unbelievably quickly. And so that's a very useful thing to know too. And that's true when you're learning anything new. It's like you'll feel like an imposter, you'll feel like a fool because you are, and you'll think, I'll never get there, and the destination might look very distant, but if you take a sufficiently small first step and get the ball rolling, you can be cruising along at a pretty good rate, generally faster than you'll think. What seems to happen when you expose people to small but challenging tasks, it does 2 things. It makes them more skilled because now they're actually dealing with the problem, and so they're acquiring the new perceptions and the new behaviors that are mastery. So they're actually expanding their domain of conceptual structures and actions. That's both conception and skill. But at the same time, they're seeing themselves as the actors that can change the direction of their life. People say, well, how can you, how do you tolerate listening to people's problems? Well, first of all, they're not your problems. You have to understand that. Because if they're your problems, you're stealing that person's problems from them. One of the most effective things you can do to help people is to listen. And there are technologies of listening. And so the first one is, don't assume that either you or the person who's talking knows what the problem is. It's so hard. Once you have the problem specified, you've solved like 95% of the problem. That diagnostic move is really hard. Are we sure we're addressing the most crucial issue? You have to have your sights focused right on the center point of the cross, right? Like in a gun sight. It's like, are we aiming at the right target? And then you can start negotiating problem solution. And but you can develop the patience to do that once you understand that initial act of listening is in itself the most helpful thing you can do. Just listen. See, if I'm face to face with you and I'm laying out the problem space, just what you're signaling to me by your face might stop me from fully revealing the truth, because maybe you'll raise an eyebrow, or there'll be a micro expression of disgust or contempt, or you'll look away, or because I'm going to be evaluating you to see how you're reacting morally to my revelations. You can signal to someone who you're talking to like open reception of the message they're receiving. A trauma is a problem you encounter in your life that's quite deep, so that it unsettles you, that you do not resolve. So it's like, imagine that in your bedroom there were holes that you could fall through into trouble. And so you want to make a map of where all the holes are so that you can walk through the landscape without falling into the pit. Now, it'd be better if you just fixed the holes, but at least you have the landscape mapped out. Well, a trauma is a hole that hasn't been filled in. And so maybe if you had a trauma when you were 4, you hit a wall and you couldn't resolve the trauma, that's no different than not maturing in relationship to that problem. I know that conflict delayed is conflict multiplied. And so if I do have a problem with someone, I want to note it, get it on the table, fight it through to the bloody bottom, fix it, and move on. And there's that's a lot of emotional stress and complex reconceptualization and retooling. And people would rather avoid that, because you come home from work and your mind is on something, whatever the hell it is, and then this like snake pops up and you think, do we really have to deal with this now? It's like, well, maybe. And if not now, when? And that's something you can also negotiate, like the risk to me is commensurate to the risk to them. That's just aggression. That's just competition. Are you? Well, it's time for you to go away for like a week and meditate on that, right? And that's soul searching, right? You're going to go down to the bottom of your heart. It's like you have to develop a philosophy of good and evil. It's a religious philosophy, essentially, because a philosophy of good and evil is a religious philosophy. Those are the same thing. You have to develop a philosophy of evil, and then you have to understand how you combat that. And that's very complicated. How do you combat evil? With truth, with love, with beauty. You have to start to embody that. Or maybe it's even worse. You're traumatized because you did something like brutal, seriously brutal, and maybe you enjoyed it. That's a very common pathway to post-traumatic stress disorder for people. And the post-traumatic stress disorder occurs when you have a very large hole that, gapes large enough to swallow virtually everything that hasn't been fixed or papered over. And so what did I discover? Well, I discovered a lot of things. I discovered that the road to totalitarian hell and atrocity is paved with lies. Lies are the pathway to hell, really, like practically and metaphysically. And so one of the things I decided, and this was in 1985, was that I was going to stop lying.